This is Dan Boland, and I'm the host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous, where people from all over the world could come and listen to stories about people that have embraced their fear and used courage to be courageous to get through it. So we want to welcome all of you to our podcast today. I think we have a very special podcast, a guest today that I think you'll appreciate. This is David Cotton. And I want to say one thing about David that I so appreciate. David and I are very unique in that both of us have podcasts. He was able to interview me last week, and I'm interviewing him this week. And he has a website called outlatewithdavid.com, and I want you to check it out. I've listened to two of his interviews, and they're powerful, very informative, and very strengthening for those in the community. David, of course, concentrates of his stories about those that came out late in life, like myself. Mine is probably a little more encompassing in the sense that I use stories for anyone who has had courage and used courage to get through their fear of coming out. So I want to talk to David today. He has a fantastic story. I want to really tell my audience that he is a retired brigadier general from the United States Air Force. And so, David, it's so good to have you on my podcast and my video. Thank you for being with me today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I enjoyed our discussion a few days ago.
Yes, thank you very much. So tell us a little bit about your life, where you grew up, how you ended up getting into the Air Force. We'd like to hear a little bit about your story on that.
Well, thank you. I grew up in Newton, Iowa, which at the time was the home of Maytag. They had the corporate headquarters there and manufacturing. And so it was the idyllic life, kind of like Mayberry RFD, where you had all the spectrums of people, the small community, get on your bike and go right away from home, come home at the end of the day on a summer day for dinner. But between, breakfast and dinner, you could be out and about. And it was a safe place to grow up. Great community, good schools, a lot of opportunity in that town. I was a Boy Scout. My father was my scout leader. That was important to me in the marching band, all those types of things. Worked at a local sandwich shop called the Maid Right, where the boss really did great with the high school kids, hired more kids than he really needed, but he wanted to make sure we could get off for our events. So the wrestlers could do the wrestling, basketball, band people, bandball, so you had an event, you could do that. Then I graduated from that, went to Iowa State University, where I got a degree in computer science and ROTC. And it was that actually got me into the Air Force, was being in ROTC. That helped pay for my college education. Didn't know how long I'd stay in. And I took my computer science degree and then worked in the Air Force, starting out that way, writing software. It was called NORAD Cheyenne Mountain Complex. That's the place that watches for attacks on the U.S. and North America by ballistic missiles. So I wrote software that would simulate those sensors to be able to test and train those crews on that. Then just worked throughout my career, continued to get challenging jobs and opportunity and doing, I guess, well, and then getting recognized.
Yes, very well.
And actions. But as you take the opportunity, and I had a lot of lucky breaks too, because there's so many talented people. Sometimes it's timing. And I recognize, if looking back in my life, timing is everything, because there were people that were maybe more talented, more skills, just the timing wasn't the same for them that I had. So I felt, just privileged to be able to have the opportunity that I did.
Now, tell us about your educational background. I believe, do you have 2 master's degrees?
I do. In addition to the computer science as a bachelor in the military, they encouraged you to work on a master's. So I got one in my off-duty time, go to night school. And it was called Computer Data Management and Personnel Management. So it's kind of a managing computer activities and the HR piece. So it was interesting, learning about labor law and those types of things to do that, and working with folks and really working with people. Really, that's where my bliss comes in too. I wasn't a technical guy. I'm really not a technical guy, even though I don't mind technology. But it's the people that get me excited. That's what I really enjoy, being a commander responsible for the mission and helping teams organize to success, to realize their capabilities and their success and their strengths to do that. And then the other masters would be in national security studies. I went to the U.S. Air Force War College, the War College, which officers do at 15-year point, maybe somewhere in there, to do that. And it's just part of their further development in their career. Very interesting school.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about when you first joined the Air Force. They asked you 3 questions. Tell us what those 3 questions are.
Well, the 3 questions are primarily more on your security clearance form. It was, are you a communist? Yes or no? Are you a member of an organization that would advocate the overthrow of the U.S. government or the Constitution? Yes or no? And are you homosexual? Yes or no? And that comes out of what's called the Lavender Scare, if you're familiar with that. Back in the Eisenhower administration, that'd be the McCarthyism era, looking for communists and homosexuals, especially the homosexuals that could be compromised because it was illegal and immoral to be a homosexual. Therefore, you could be compromised and be, what do you want to call it? Forget the term. To where someone could actually, get you in a compromising position, and you could be blackmailed. There we go, blackmailed into divulging information and secrets because you couldn't be a homosexual. Therefore, if you were and somebody knew, then you'd be a threat. So those questions would come up periodically in that security clearance review. So for me, the word homosexual is almost a trigger word. You can call me just about anything else, just not a homosexual, because it takes me back to that. Even though when I answered those questions, I always said no, because I never identified with myself in my head that I was. I just knew what I thought, but I thought that was just normal. I didn't think I was gay or a homosexual. If I didn't, that wasn't, no, I couldn't be. So therefore I was not.
David, do you think there was a lot of shame with that, though, because of the region, the time you were living in? And
well, I've been asked that question before, and the more I think about it, no, there's not shame, because shame would be I was doing something I thought was wrong and inappropriate, and I did not think I was doing anything wrong or inappropriate. I just knew what I was thinking. Now, when I look back in time, I feel bad for maybe not addressing it. So maybe retroactive shame in my action, but not really that much of it, to be honest, because I answered truthfully. I wasn't lying.
Well, I think you were denying who you were. And I know what that's like. I did the same thing. I think that I
denied
understand that.
It was more just kind of pushing it away. I used to tell people, I put on a mask, or I created a mask over time that was, 3 feet thick, that just hid who I really was. I would rather be the person standing behind the plant in the corner at a gathering or a party instead of with people. I'm not that way anymore. I'm very social. My parents are very extroverted. I always said I'm introverted. I'm like Spock of Star Trek, no emotions. Live long and prosper. But I'm finding out, no, I'm really more extroverted than I ever thought I was for the majority of my life, for decades, because I need that personal interaction for energy to do that. And the more I learn about myself, the more outgoing I am, and the less of the defenses go down, because all those things about the mask was a defensive thing. So you couldn't know who I was. Didn't know at the time, but this is what I now believe through lots of therapy, lots of coaching, lots of personal analysis, and a lot of kind of peer coaching with other people through their struggles and realizations.
Now, I think also, when you are in a situation, the generation you're raised in, and understanding that gay was not as accepted as well, it's accepted more today than it was back then. So a lot of times we put on a mask, we go into hiding. When was the first time that you felt you had same-sex attraction? Was there a time or an event that happened where you realized that you had an interest in men?
Again, going back in time and looking at things I did as a boy, even, kind of embarrassed to tell this story, but the days before we had paper recycling, there'd be paper drives. People would bundle up their newspapers and magazines and throw them on the curb, and the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts would come through and pick them up. I guess we sold it for money or something. And you'd come across like a Playboy magazine. I remember guys tearing out pictures of the ladies. I remember tearing out pictures of the men that were in there in the ads, and then locking them in a small box, in the toy room at home, in the basement. And then years later, finding them and then, burning them on the gas grill in the backyard. So like I say, there's probably some shame there in that act itself, at that point. But I knew there was something there, but I thought it was somewhat normal. But now I know that was just deep denial of who I was. I was just ignoring that fact. In retrospect, again, this all works from now, looking backwards.
Of course, yeah.
Where my mind was and what I was really thinking and just denying and trying not to be that, because I was brought up to, it was illegal, immoral, not appropriate. Anyone you ever heard talked about as being a homosexual was always in a negative. I remember the death of someone at a place I'd worked at. I think that the guy killed himself, and I had known him, no interaction, because I never had any sexual contact with anybody, during those times or while I was married at all. But this person killed himself, and later it came out that they were gay. They didn't call them gay at the time. They said they were homosexual. In my town, I didn't know of any openly gay men. I think there's one guy that probably was, and then he died later on after high school and college during the AIDS crisis. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that was the case. So there wasn't anybody around, and that wasn't talked about. It was always in the negative.
Mm-hmm. I get that. Now, you went on and got married to your wife.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us how that happened. And then you had two beautiful children.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about your family life and when you came out to your wife as being gay.
Well, I was introduced to her. I was in my 30s, fell in love. We had a nice, courtship. Had enjoyed it. I was in love. She was in love. It was a beautiful wedding, beautiful life. I was military. We moved around a lot. She was very supportive. She gave up her career essentially because she stopped working. She had worked her way up very high into her profession. What she did was very known for her skills and abilities, but she gave all that up to marry this military guy, and then started moving around, realized it's kind of hard for her to have a career and me a career moving. And then we wanted a family and had two children, very close together, about 22 months. They were born, and she was always the one there while I was busy deploying or working my job, making sure that they were settled in the next school and the next community and their activities. We were a good couple, supporting all those activities together. Can't ever remember where we even had crosswords or arguments. It was just, everything was great, family vacations. She has a large family. Mine is not as large, but dynamic groups that both of us were respected and loved on both sides. And then we were in D.C. We decided to move to Iowa. So when I left D.C., I'd retired from the Air Force already in 2011. Eventually went back to work in the Pentagon as a senior civilian, as one of the deputy chief information officers for the Department of Defense. And a job came open in Iowa that kept trying to get me to come back to Iowa after being gone for so many years. So we decided to do that, came back, and I worked there. I think it's because I was away from that defense establishment and not being asked those three questions you brought up. Even though those three questions by then were starting to go away.
Yeah.
Don't ask, don't tell didn't officially end until after I was retired by a couple months. But the precursor, all that, it was already softening up. I remember an Army Brigadier General that I used to work with, and he and his husband were often highlighted on the stage during June, during Pride Month, in the Pentagon courtyard. So it was and accepted to do that, even though Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't officially all shut down. Most of it had been, taken apart. It was okay. And it's now fun to look back at officers that served with me are now openly gay with their partners, where they were not before. They were just a single officer moving around, when in reality, they were actually in a partnership and just couldn't talk about it.
No, I was thinking, so there were others that were in a similar situation that were gay, but because of being in the military at that time, they couldn't come out as their authentic self. Would that be a true statement?
Oh, true statement. I can think of, I won't say them by name, but officers that served with me and never saw them with a date or anything like that, and just didn't ask the question. In fact, one of those things it's the subliminal thing in my mind. One of the things I feared is, as a unit commander, if someone was accused of being a homosexual at certain points of my career, based on policy, my job would be to ensure that was explored and investigated.
Yeah.
They never happened, so I didn't have to worry about that
Right.
in real time, but that was always a lingering thing. But yeah, I know of officers that served with me in units where I was the commander or responsible. And at the time I had no indications, but later on, now they're on Facebook with their husband and their adopted son, as an example. It's a beautiful family, doing what we should all be able to do, loving each other and having a family, and providing all of the values of being a human being on the planet.
So tell about the time you came out to your wife and your kids, because find that story very courageous on your part, David. Tell us how that occurred.
Well, as I said, I was no longer working in the Pentagon. I was now working at a university, actually. And then after that, I transferred and worked for a small consulting company. So I was no longer with a security clearance, wasn't asked those questions. My mind continued to percolate about all those things. I was reaching age 60. Maybe that was part of it. I don't know. It was my late 50s. Mm-hmm. And I'd find myself asking myself, am I gay? I mean, literally have the smartphone in the bathroom doing am I gay tests on the internet to see what would come up and say, oh, yeah, this, and this, maybe you are. I mean, those types of things run through my head. So I was on a business trip at a conference in Florida. And it was a boring conference. I could have given all the presentations, so it wasn't very intellectually stimulating. And I had all these books that I had downloaded on my Kindle. A lot of those books now are listed on the outlatewithdavid.com website of things I read and reviewed, and podcasts I listened to, Graying Rainbows, Dr. Jonah Campbell, The Coming Out Lounge, now called Life Uncloseted by Rick Clemens. Listened to all those things, consumed it, and said, I think there's something here. So at that conference, I thought, I'm gay. I mean, let's face it, David, you don't have to do these tests on your phone in the bathroom. You have been denying that. So I remember looking in the mirror in that Hampton Inn. I can still see that bathroom in the mirror and say, David, you're a gay man. It was like terror and relief at the same time, because I had been very depressed beforehand, withdrawn from life. I would drive 40 minutes to work and cry while driving my car to work, and then get myself put back together before I went in to work with my clients, because I was a consultant with lots of clients at different places I had to drive to or do them over Zoom. And then do the same thing going home, cry on the way home, and work through all that in my head. And so in that February at that conference, I came out to myself. And then after that, in March, I came out to a friend who'd come out 20 years earlier, only to have him tell me, say, David, I always thought you were gay. It's just taking you a while. Like, oh, thanks. Would have been nice maybe to give me a heads up. And then finally came out to her in April after seeing the Rachel Maddow, Pete Buttigieg interview, where Mayor Pete at the time was talking about when he came back from his deployment, he had to be his authentic self, because Rachel said, I don't know how you can live that way. That would just crush me. And I'm thinking, I think I'm in the crushed state.
Yeah.
I've got to tell her, even though it's going to drop 600 tons of bricks on her. And the way I did it wasn't.
We're going to talk about that in a second. But didn't you also, when you finally looked yourself in the mirror at the Hampton Inn, you said there was fear, but you said you felt peaceful, or you felt like finally recognized who your authentic self was?
Well, I'd made a decision, because, when you make progress, you have to make decisions to progress.
Make a decision, yes.
So I made a decision, because indecision, you're just stuck in an indecision loop. Am I? Okay, I am. Now that I am, now what? So the indecision loop stops. That calms down. But then the what next loop goes up. What do I do next with this? Okay, I'm calm. I've come to this realization, but now what do I do with it? Who do I tell? How does it affect me?
But what did you give yourself at that time? Did you give yourself, for the first time, an acceptance that I am a gay man? Is that the first time you recognized who you authentically were?
Yes, when I said it in the mirror. Mm-hmm. Looking in the mirror.
I'm proud of the courage you showed on that. Now we're going to talk about how you came out to your wife now that you began to realize your authentic self. How did you tell your wife?
Well, after seeing that Pete Buttigieg interview, it was before going to bed. 2 days later, I was going to bed earlier because I was getting up early to work out, and she came in and I told her, which was not the good way to do that. I just kind of dropped it on her. I didn't think through, what's she going to do? Who's she going to go talk to? Is there a safe space for her? What's the safe space for me? it's late at night. She's probably tired. I'm tired. It was just not the way to do it in retrospect. But I didn't have I wasn't seeing a therapist. Didn't have a coach. I didn't have a counselor. I didn't have a confidant other than my friend I had called. And I hadn't thought through it and plotted it out in my mind of all of the different pieces and parts I needed to consider. So I really make that point to guys I work with now is think through all of that environment of you're giving this information to someone who is going to be more than likely surprised and like, oh my goodness, what next? And have 1,000 questions, or just be no questions at all and just walk away stunned. And so think of that too, and then how you would work through that to know what's next. Because you can't just pull somebody into the closet with you. You've got to give them permission to now. They got to talk to somebody with this information that you've just released.
Mm-hmm. And they're in shock and they're in pain. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're almost speechless at times. It's like, what did my husband just tell me? Because I think in your case, she had no indications, did she, that you had same-sex attraction?
No indication, and I had never done anything with it either. I'd honored the marriage vows. I had never cheated, hadn't stepped out. It was just the way I felt. And so some people say, how can you know you're gay if you've never tried it? Well, I just knew. I just knew it was a feeling. Mm-hmm. It's hard to explain, but I just knew. It's like when I ask people, how do you know you're a heterosexual? They just know.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And it's the same thing when I talk about people. A person who is African American know they're black, and a white person knows they're white. They just know because they know, and they see the difference in the color. So I understand that too. So talk about coming out to your children, how you were able to do that and what their response was.
Well, by then I had a fabulous therapist. The man's incredible. Ian Nelson Johnson. If anyone is in Madison, Wisconsin, look up Dr. Ian Nelson Johnson. He's incredible. He helped me come up with the way that I might do that. And I wrote a script basically explaining to them that I love them and I love their mother. But I've had this realization and understanding about myself. And while it's likely to have some change, it will never change that their mom and I are their parents. And we want the best for them. We'll be for them at all times and support them through their life as they continue. And I just explained there's just that, again, that I had honored the marriage as well. So they knew that because honor and integrity was important in our family values.
Yes.
And they just kind of sat there stunned, and I had it written out. I didn't read from it, but I used it as kind of like notes, and then offered a copy if they wanted it afterwards. One did, and one did not. One gave me a big hug of acceptance, even though kind of a shock on the face, I think, for being open and vulnerable. And one, pulled the sweatshirt up and wiped the tears out of their eyes. Later to find out that the crying was more not for me coming out, but they were the last in their friends group where the parents were still married. And in their mind, now they were going to be like their friends, and their parents would more than likely not be together in the future. At that stage, didn't know for sure what was going to happen to the marriage, but you can only imagine when you drop this on your spouse, that obvious question is, are we staying married or not? Right. Some do, and some don't. For us, we did not. We ended up divorcing. But
And your daughter was the one that shed the tears. Now your son is the one that gave you a hug. And I think, tell us what is really, I think, powerful about your son.
Well, months later, when I was visiting him where he was working in between at school sessions, he wanted to know how I knew I was gay. And I explained it to him, and he said, me too, at least queer. That's about all he said. And he was just, being vulnerable and open with me. So I can only think that my openness and vulnerability maybe gave him permission at some level or comfort.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then there was another extended family member that came out later too. So it wasn't just me and him. Mm-hmm. And then I came out to my mother months later. Her reaction was support. She's very accepting. At some point in my life, she's had more LGBTQ plus friends than I have, which was interesting before I came out. In her church, especially, very open and affirming church. her concern is what environment had she and my late father not provided to allow me to feel welcome and safe to be myself. And I said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. You were fantastic parents, setting a role model all the time. It was not you at all, because they were very community centered and family centered for sure. Again, it was like Mayberry RFD, idyllic, childhood, doing things as a family all the time, and know that it was okay to express yourself. There was, your challenge to do things in a positive way. It wasn't toxic at all. You understand where the bar was, but they wanted you to succeed and be independent and successful. So it was, they were doing the right things. It was never punitive at all. So I said nothing at all. You set an example. It was me and just the overall world environment I was in. And, it's not your fault at all. So,
well, yeah, and with your mom, you had a heterosexual ally.
Oh, yeah.
And that is a wonderful thing as well. Now, your dad, I think did your dad pass away before you told him?
He did. He 7 years before I came out, he did.
It's hard to know what his response would be. Do you think he would have been accepting?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Of course. Yeah, he was the type. I can remember stories as a kid. He was open to all people in our small, primarily white town, Iowa. When the first Black family came to town, I hate to say this because it puts shame on the town, but it's reality. That family was greeted with not a lot of welcoming things, like burning crosses in their front yard and sugar in the gas tank. And he with some other friends went over to help that family, when that happened to them. And then when a lot of Vietnamese were relocating to the United States during, that would have been what, 70s? I think it was. He paired up with an incoming student and helped her learn her job at McDonald's and help the family, those types of things. It's just that kind of person, always doing, they were public service people all the time. I think that's why, well, my brothers and sister both went into education. I went in the military. My father was in manufacturing. He said, none of you are producing materials, improve the economy, goods and service. I said, well, but you brought us up in a service family. So that's what we always saw. I said, okay, I get it. So.
Now how about your brothers and sisters? Do they accept you as?
Oh, very much so. Yes.
They do.
They do.
And your two children do now, don't they?
They always have.
They always have. And that's great. I know the relationship with your ex-wife is not where you'd like it to be.
I like to do, but she's probably, I got to give her space.
Of course. And they have their pain. I mean, this was someone that loved you deeply and dearly. Now, you were in the military, I think you said 29 years and several months?
29 years and 9 months.
And 9 months. Okay, great. Now, David, I want to talk about this incredible website you have, outlatewithdavid.com. What was the reason you started this, and why did you want to give this to people that came out late in the community? I think this is such an incredible story. Tell me why this happened.
Well, soon after I came out, remember, I listened to Dr. Ginger Campbell on Graying Rainbows was her podcast, and she's now stopped that podcast. And there were just fabulous stories. And I was guest number 50 and told my story on that. And as part of that, in the show notes, she'll say, what do you have, resources you want to share with people, or how people can get in contact with you, things like that. And I created a website, davidcotton.me. So davidcotton.me was my first website. It still exists. And it had a list of these resources. Again, all those books I had on my Kindle, the websites I'd read, the podcasts I'd listened to, the YouTube videos, the TED Talks, the doctoral theses on sexuality, all types of things I'd consumed. I thought, I need to share this with other people because I know what I was looking for. I couldn't find that. I couldn't find it curated. Yeah, Rick Clemens had some stuff and Ginger had her guests, but nobody had put together something where I could click and read, or click and buy to do that. So I did that website. Ginger also got me thinking about life coaching. Plus, during COVID, I spent 24 weeks, again, we were all at home on Zoom. And the Mankind Project had some groups for LGBTQ plus men where there was group coaching. There'd be 10 men and 2 coaches. We're all gay, bi, or trans in this group, or whatever we identify as. And we would get coached in that group environment, and you hear other stories and other people. And I got inspired by coaching. So when my professional career pivoted, when I realized I really don't like IT, it's the people I like.
Yeah.
I decided to go into life coaching and get certified. You don't have to be, but to me, it was important to be certified. So I went through, got
Yeah.
my certification that's recognized by the International Coaching Federation, has ethics and all that kind of stuff associated with it. And as part of that certification process, you talk about podcasts and your niche. And I said, okay, coming out late, folks, kind of fits with me. I kind of what I've been trying to do to help people to do that.
Mhm.
So the podcast came out of that. And then clients started to appear wanting that. And from me being on Ginger's podcast, people would find me too. And Ginger would send them to me, say, oh, this person contacted me and connect me to these folks who are looking for resources. So I would then talk about my story, answer their questions, and more importantly, ask them a lot of questions because they have the answers in themselves because they need to figure it out. I can't. I can explain what I did, but they got to figure out their own thing. So I built the podcast. Out of the sky dropped a person who's helping me as the producer editor that's very talented in that realm with their background and believes in what we're doing on the mission. And so we, as you know, because you're one of our guests, put together and share that information. And I can say it's very humbling and terrifying at the same time. I had at least one noted person that said, I'm alive because I found the podcast and you.
Oh, wow.
Because they
It was
decided,
life-saving for them. It was life-saving.
which really ramps up the responsibility as the person putting out information to make sure you get the right people with the right information to help them. Again, the individual has to make the decision themselves. I can't do that for them, nor can anybody else. They have to do that with their partner, their environment, whomever they're working with in a relationship. Because most I work with are in a relationship of some sort, which is why they're kind of struggling more, what that might be for them. So it's my act of service, really, back to that community. You know, we don't charge for the content; we just push it out there. You know, we don't monetize the podcast either for that very reason as well. We don't want that as part of it. It's true act of service to help those that were like me and others that were struggling for information that could not find it.
And I want to share this with David. This is exactly my mission, what David said there. I don't make any money off mine. In fact, the proceeds of my book go to support 3 LGBT organizations. I pay for all my podcasts 100%. I have no desire to make money. But you made a comment in there about one person heard your podcast that saved their life. That's the reason I went public with my book. And the reason I went public with my podcast is to save lives. Another thing you said there that really I think is a very important point. When you were growing up, you couldn't have a podcast like this. We couldn't have those that we could be allies with, a community that we could be with. And I think community is so important. Some really important things. A community is important for whether you're heterosexual ally or whether you're heterosexual or whether you're homosexual, lesbian, trans, gay, whatever you want to call it. We're all in the same group of humanity. And I just want equality for humanity. And that's the reason I do my podcast. That's the reason I do my book as well. And I have so much respect for David and what he's doing for the community right now. Well, I think we both have the foundation of love and caring and wanting to have people and help people go through some difficult parts of their life. And in the process, hopefully we'll save a life or two. And if I only have someone listen that would save one life, it's 100% worth it for me.
Yeah.
And David and I are both people person. I was in the people business my whole life, and David obviously loves people as well. So David, I want you to then tell about what your future is of your podcast. And by the way, I want my audience to check it out. It is remarkable. I've listened to 2 stories there. They're remarkable. And is there anything else that you want to say about your website? You out late with David because you came out late. Center is around people that came out late. Is there anything you'd like to say more about your podcast?
Well, I'm Out Late with David, and it's outlatewithdavid.com. We're telling, true life stories. Even have one story of someone who transitioned to a female at age 50. So it's just not old gay guys, quite frankly. And we know that the people that are listening are all ages, which is rewarding. it's again to provide information for them to do that, list of resources. And if anyone has a story that they think would be helpful, they can reach me through that, or they can email me at david@davidcottoncoaching.com. That's david@davidcottoncoaching.com. And we can talk to them to see if their story we believe would resonate to share and help others, because we're always looking, as you always looking for new guests, and we have some booked out through the rest of the year, which is good. So we'll keep on. We're trying to get down to at least one episode each month. I'd like to do more, but as you know, it takes time and effort to do that as well. But it's all worth it. I'd say
It is totally worth it.
I spend probably more time on that than actually the coaching practice. Where I thought it'd be the other way around, is that the coaching practice was my primary focus and the podcast was a secondary. Now it's balanced in the two hands, because they're both important, actually.
Of course.
To get information out there. And then those that want help, again, can't tell them what to do, but help work through the process. And I make it very clear in the coaching process. I said, I'm not a therapist. I cannot help you with trauma of the past. I can't help you with PTSD. I can't help you with depression. But I can help you understand and find yourself at some level so you can move forward. And if you're working with a therapist, which I hope you are, if you have some of those things, tell your therapist you're working with me too. I've never had anyone have their therapist say stop, which is good. But I want them to know that our relationship exists because we can go work together. That happens sometimes where my client brings information that they work through with their therapist to now move forward and kind of work on the action plan together. And now they have an accountability partner to be actually up to move forward and whatever they need to do in their life to do that. And it's not all coming out either. I have clients that are maybe in a career change or other things in their life that they would just like to fine tune and work to a higher level. I like to say that coaching gets you from where you are to more of your excellence and more of your shine, and to realize more of your potential. Where a therapist is helping you get from some trauma you may have or something of dysfunction that you don't know how to resolve, that you need their help to understand that past, to move you to that more middle part of the space to really realize yourself.
I love what you said about your work is to get them to shine. Get them to shine. I think that's so encouraging for you to say. David, I always ask my podcast guest, you have an incredible story. You showed a lot of courage. And I'm so proud of the things you've accomplished in your life. Not only because of coming out as gay, but what you've accomplished professionally in your life. I think that's pretty remarkable too. But I want to know if there's people, because we're going to get people listening from all parts of the world. And is there anything in your story, because you're going to have those afraid to come out, maybe those are in fear of getting exposed, although we do see things better in this country than we have in a long time, but it's a long way to go for equality. We still are not there. But what would your story or what you have been through that you would like my podcasters that they could think about, reminisce on, that would be helpful for them if they're struggling with some type of fear in their life? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, your theme of the courage to be courageous is, of course, important. And I would say, while they think about that, also think about in your darkest day. I mean, in my darkest day, I was literally in our walk-in closet in the fetal position in the dark, terrified, not knowing what I was going to do next. I was just frozen and stalled. And if you have that imagery of someone who is so depressed, lost, and confused, not wanting to live, when I was driving that 45 minutes, some days I thought, it'd be so nice if the truck just hit me on this bridge and took me over the edge and I'd be dead. I wouldn't have to deal with this. Luckily, I didn't have the courage to kill myself. That's where courage would be inappropriate, because all it does is shift the problem to somebody else. It doesn't solve a thing. So if you're in threat, dial the national suicide hotline and ask for help, 988. And if you're a veteran, 9881. But the takeaway is, though, look at me as an example and look at Dan as an example. There is happiness and joy on the other side of that deep, dark depression where you're totally lost.
Incredible
But
piece.
You have to do the work and own it. You have to own it. You have to be, I had a guest Rick Clemens, we give him credit, said have to be unapologetically yourself. Can't apologize. You just have to be. And if you be,
Great comment.
then you're going to be in the do space, be, do, have. If you're going to be unapologetically yourself, then you'll know what you need to do, and then you'll have what you want, which is that joy. So you've got to work towards it, not say I've got to be joyful, but I've got to understand who I am and own it in an unapologetic way, to be authentic is the word I'd like to use, to be your authentic self, whatever that means to you, to move forward. And there is joy on the other side. So that's a takeaway, is that even though it seems horrible now and you don't see any way out, the family's going to collapse and my spouse is going to collapse. I'm not going to be a dad anymore. I'm going to lose the kids. But there's all kinds of stories that say that's absolutely not the case. There are ways to the other side of that where you can still be a functioning dad, a relationship with a former spouse at some level. Kids are still there, and the friends too. There's going to be some ups and downs, but you got to be patient, and things will come together as they need to be in a better way than they are today.
And I think you made a comment when we did the prelude on this. Even though you're scared, don't let the fear stop you being your authentic self. And that ties in so well with my platform, is don't let the fear stop you. And even in my memoir, I talk about fear is false evidence that appears real. FEAR. It's false evidence, but it appears real.
Real. Yep. That's all you know in the moment.
And the way to get through it is realize courage will help you to identify the fear, not run from it. Identify the fear and work it through as well. And I think that's such a powerful story as well. It's been such a pleasure, David. I want to again commend you for doing a great work for our community. You and I think we're kind of like brothers on this. I've got to know David so well, and I'm just so appreciative that I have another mentor in my life, in David, that has been able to do the same thing that we're doing, even though we're very similar in our viewpoint of people and coming out late. I came out late in life. I think I told David, I don't think we recorded this. I said, I'm going to be a poster child, I'm not a child, for the latest one that came out, because I came out in 70. And then David says, well, he knows one that came out in 80. So I felt like that David just topped me on that one.
It wasn't me, though. So
No, I wasn't. Yeah. Thank you so much. You've been such a gift for me, and I appreciate you sharing your story, showing your courageousness. You're a wonderful man. One thing I'd like to leave as a final comment. Do you have peace and happiness in your life right now?
Yes, I do. Very much so.
Excellent.
Very much so.
Appreciate that for me. David, thanks so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on my podcast today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate that.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.